I am a third-generation American. My parents and my maternal grandmother were born in Brooklyn, New York. But I didn't know I loved America until my early 20s. In my third year of college, I studied in England and began a life of travel that eventually took me to 130 countries. That was when I began to understand how important America was to the world, and still is. That was when I began to understand how unique America was, and still is. That was when I began to appreciate the decency of the American people. Being away from America for a year, spending the Christmas season in Morocco where there was no Christmas season, and ending the year with a month in the Soviet Union where there was no freedom, this all had a life-changing impact on me. I realized how lucky I was to be an American. I even realized how much I simply enjoyed being an American. I'll explain. 1. How important America is to the world. Without in any way diminishing the enormous sacrifices made by England and France, it was America's entry into World War I that made the defeat of Imperial Germany possible and ended that horrible war. It was America that made the Allied victory possible in World War II and kept Western Europe free during the Cold War. 37,000 Americans died fighting the North Korean and Chinese communist regimes. Were it not for America, all of Korea would have no human rights and would endure the mass torture, starvation, and murder that have been routine in North Korea until today. The next time you hear the lie that America fought in Vietnam for colonialist reasons, ask that person, why did America fight in Korea? I'll tell you why. To stop the spread of communism, the greatest genocidal and totalitarian ideology in history, and thereby enable more than half of Korea to live in freedom. Another 58,000 Americans died in Vietnam to enable the South Vietnamese to live in the same freedom America made possible for South Koreans. Neither Vietnam nor Korea had any natural resources that America wanted. Americans died in those two countries solely so that their people could be free. And without diminishing the role of the great British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and the great Pope John Paul II, it was America that ended communism in the Soviet Union, Poland, East Germany, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Romania, and Bulgaria, and liberated, among other nations, Ukraine, Azerbaijan, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. 2. America is unique. America is the only country that was founded not on a race, ethnicity, or nationality, but on an idea. Limited government, because the founders of America believed first and foremost in liberty. America became the freest country in world history, which is why France gave the Statue of Liberty to one country, America. And America has given more liberty and opportunity to more people from more nations than any country in world history. Yes, America allowed slavery in half of its states, but every society in the world practiced slavery. What rendered America unique is that Americans killed one another in its bloodiest war to abolish slavery, and that it eventually became the least racist, multiracial country in history. It remains the only white majority country to have ever elected a black leader. And Africans know how good America is, which is why by the 1980s, more black Africans had come to America voluntarily as immigrants seeking freedom and opportunity than ever came as slaves. 3. Americans are decent people. Ask visitors what they think of Americans. They're likely to tell you how friendly Americans are. There are mean and bad Americans, and there are kind and good people in every country. But having traveled abroad every year of my life since college, and to all 50 American states, and being sensitive to people's goodness and happiness, I have been continually amazed at the essential decency of most Americans. I fell in love with America at the age of 20, and given the freedom, the opportunities, and the religious tolerance I have experienced, I realize all these years later that America has loved me too. I'm Dennis Prager.
G'day there. As an outsider, I have a unique perspective from which to view America. As an American friend said to me, sometimes it takes someone on the outside to remind us what we're like on the inside. I'm an Australian, you might have already guessed that, and I love my home country, and I am proud that my nation has long been a reliable American ally. But I know that Australia is not America, and that my country has not achieved what America has achieved. No country in human history has. What makes America different? There are many answers, but start with one you might not have thought of. Most people think America is all about success. I see it a little differently. I think America is all about failing. Most people in the world don't get the chance to fail, but Americans take it for granted. Only Americans say, if at first you don't succeed, try again. There's even an academic study to prove this. According to a study by Harvard Business School professor Stephen Rogers, most entrepreneurs fail 4 times before they succeed. Success takes timing and hard work, some good luck, many other factors. But to succeed, you must be given the chance to fail, and you must accept responsibility if you do. I love that about Americans. At their best, they don't blame others. They learn from their mistakes and do better the next time. And in America, there's almost always a next time. Nowhere else are you as free to take entrepreneurial risks. Talk to someone who has tried to start a small business in Germany or Brazil, and you'll see what I mean. From the outside looking in, I can only admire this. And I'm not the only one. Just take a look at the CEOs of major Silicon Valley companies. You will see the names of entrepreneurs from all over the world: India, Pakistan, Russia, Israel, you name the country. Why did they come to America to innovate? Because there's a lot of money here? Yes, of course, that's part of it. But there's a lot of money in London and Berlin and Tokyo as well. They came to America because America gave them the chance to fail, and therefore the best chance in the world to succeed. And the rest of the world can thank their lucky stars for America's economic success. Not only is America by far the world's largest economy, it is also the world's largest consumer. And the world's economy depends on being able to sell to America. It would also be perfectly natural for Americans to want to keep all this wealth to themselves, but they don't. Just the opposite, in fact. America has been the most selfless nation in the history of the world. Yet another way in which America is different. What other nation fights for the freedom of others? In Europe, in 2 world wars, in Korea, in Vietnam, and yes, in Iraq. In all those wars, America had very little or nothing to gain economically. Whenever there is a humanitarian crisis anywhere in the world, Haiti after a hurricane, Indonesia after a tsunami, who is the first to rush aid to these places? No matter where the calamity is, at home or abroad, Americans invariably raise millions of dollars almost instantly to send food and clothing and supplies to people in distress they don't know and will never meet. Who else does that? I love that America is different. What worries me about America is that I see her increasingly trying to act like other nations. It worries me to see that so many Americans are drawn to the ossified ideas of Europe. That's the old world. It was old in 1776 even, when America broke away from it. Why would America want to reverse its own revolution? Why would Americans want to follow the economic and social model of a continent that they can see is failing economically and socially? Do Americans really want to emulate France or Greece? It worries me to see so many Americans wallowing in victim status, blaming outside forces for their predicament, rather than accepting responsibility and seeking to improve themselves. It worries me to see American schools debasing America's own glorious history, It worries me to see America's debt and government grow larger, while its military and its personal freedoms shrink. It worries me because a weak, self-doubting America is bad for everyone, everywhere, who loves freedom. But these worries never last long, because each time I visit America, I encounter a people who are confident, competitive, courageous, faithful, idealistic, innovative, inspirational, charitable, and optimistic. It's like no other place in the world. I pray it stays that way. I'm Nick Adams for Prager University.
I picked a fine time to become an American. It was a grey, overcast morning in Oakland, California. I was one of 1,094 people of every colour and creed from 85 nations, beginning with Afghanistan and ending with Yemen. We had gathered, anxiously clutching the requisite documents, outside the rather antique Paramount Cinema. I wasn't the only new citizen of European origin, but we were a distinct minority. Rather to my surprise, the Chinese were the most numerous group, accounting for close to a fifth of the new Americans. How many Americans became Chinese citizens that week? Next were the Mexicans, more than 150 of them, then the Filipinos, closely followed by the Indians. Yet it was the sheer range of countries represented that was most marvellous. The young man to my right, immaculately dressed in white, was from Eritrea. He had studied computer science in Wales and had initially come to California to work for NASA. I approach any encounter with US bureaucracy weighed down by dread. So, I wondered, would this be like the Department of Motor Vehicles, famed for its Soviet-style antagonism to the public? Or would it be more like the implacable, pitiless Internal Revenue Service? In fact, the officials of the US Citizenship and Immigration Services could hardly have been more affable. The Master of Ceremonies was a genial, balding, bespectacled chap who won his audience over with a virtuoso display of multilingualism, chatting to us in what sounded like pretty fluent Spanish, Chinese, French, Hindi, and Tagalog. Yet this was very far from a multicultural occasion. Quite the reverse. To get us in the mood for our impending Americanization, a choir sang a patriotic medley, including a rather baroque setting of the preamble to the Constitution, Yankee Doodle, and Woody Guthrie's This Land Is Your Land. Well, that did it. The way that song conjures up vast American landscapes, from the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream waters, always gets me by the throat, because, glimpsed in films, such vistas were what first drew me to the United States. Then came the information about our rights and obligations, specifically our right to vote, our option to obtain a passport, and our inextricable link to the social security system. Nothing, rather disappointingly, about the right to bear arms, and not a word about the spiralling federal debt we were all now on the hook for. The ceremony then became more stirring. A Faces of America video had a distinctly martial soundtrack. We raised our right hands to swear the oath of allegiance, absolutely renouncing all allegiance to any foreign prince, potentate, state, or sovereignty, and swearing to bear arms on behalf of the United States when required by the law. Then we placed our right hands on our hearts to recite the Pledge of Allegiance to the national flag and to the Republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. It's heady stuff, even in Oakland on a Thursday morning. And then there he was, the President of the United States himself, much larger than life on the big screen. "This country is now your country," Donald Trump told us rather sternly. "Our history is now your history, and our traditions are now your traditions." And that wasn't all. "You now share the obligation to teach our values to others, to help newcomers assimilate to our way of life." Compare and contrast with the Barack Obama version. "Together, we are a nation united not by any one culture or ethnicity or ideology. The grand finale was God Bless the USA, a country music anthem by Lee Greenwood, made famous following the 9/11 terror attacks on New York and Washington. It too was a call to arms. And I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free, and I won't forget the men who died who gave that right to me. More than half a century of being British has made it hard for me not to cringe just a little at this kind of thing. But this hokum is now my hokum, and this president is now my president, until such time as we the people vote in another one. Yes, I picked a fine time to become an American, because it's always a fine time. I'm Neil Ferguson, Fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford for Prager University.
Americans come from every corner of the globe. We represent every race, every ethnicity, every religion. So what unifies us? Two things: values and history. History? How can history unify us if we come from so many different places? My parents illustrate my point. They came from India and settled in the rural South. You don't get much further away from your ethnic origins than that. Like generations of immigrants before them, my parents, my brother, and I studied the inspiring stories of the Mayflower, the Boston Tea Party, the settling of the West, the personal stories and struggles of great American men and women. We fully adopted American history as our own. My friend, Dennis Prager, has a special way of expressing this. He says he has two historical fathers: Abraham, the father of the Jewish people, and George Washington, the father of the American people. My mom still makes a mean curry. My parents still practice their Hindu religion, but they're also as American as apple pie. That's because once you're an American, you're fully American. The new citizen from Armenia, Cambodia, Bolivia, or Nigeria is considered every bit as American as the great-great-granddaughter of a Civil War veteran. They share values and history. It's hard to imagine a more unifying idea, and it's fundamentally, uniquely, and gloriously American. In a speech before the Civil War, the abolitionist preacher Theodore Parker popularized what he called the American idea. Parker's recipe combined three ingredients. Only in America did they exist simultaneously. All people are created equal. All possess certain unalienable rights. All should have the opportunity to develop their individual talents. Parker, whose sermons inspired Abraham Lincoln and Martin Luther King, believed in one American set of values, supported by all Americans and open to all Americans. Thanks to Lincoln, King, and many others, what Parker envisioned has largely come to pass. No country has woven more people of different races, backgrounds, and ethnicities more successfully into a single country than America. But this tapestry is now being ripped apart at the seams. America's founding ideals, once a source of shared pride, are increasingly depicted as a source of shared shame. These ideals, it turns out, were just a cover for systemic racism and exploitation. That is the new narrative from the progressive left. It is being sold to the American public by our educational institutions, our media, and now even major corporations. The consequences of this are obvious and tragic. Imagine a child coming to the United States, or any American-born child for that matter, and learning that the nation was created not to promote liberty, but to promote the founders' slave interests, or that California, Texas, and Arizona were stolen from Mexico, or that free markets exploit workers rather than providing them with opportunities for a better life, or a new immigrant being told in an equity, diversity, and inclusion seminar that his fellow white employees secretly despise him, even though they seem to treat him well. In short, Parker's American idea has been turned upside down. Instead of an aspirational society, the left sees people limited by the circumstances of their birth. If you're born white, you're privileged. If you're born a different color, you're a victim. The whole idea and reality of America was that with hard work, self-discipline, and of course a little bit of luck, you could transcend your past and make your own future. The left rejects this. Your group identity defines you, or to be more precise, predefines you. Only with the aid of the government can your identity group succeed. As an individual, you're powerless, unless, of course, you're white. The left has even changed the way we seek social improvement. Whereas the abolitionist leaders of the 1850s and the civil rights leaders of the 1950s successfully appealed to America's conscience to right historical wrongs, today's left rejects America's conscience as inherently corrupt. And if you don't fully buy into the left's plans for a new America, well, be quiet about it. There are real consequences if you're not. Whereas progressives once championed free speech, even at such extremes as Americans' right to burn the flag and publish pornography, they now enforce silence. Assert the biological reality of two sexes, reject apocalyptic environmentalism, or insist that citizens present an ID before they vote, and you run the risk of being banned from social media, the modern equivalent of the town square. You might also lose your job and your reputation. Is this America's future? The left says yes. The center left, the so-called liberal moderates, they're MIA. It's not clear what they believe. Conservatives take a different view. We recognize America's shortcomings, but we also see a nation always striving to become a more perfect union. We see a nation with more freedom, more opportunity, and more minority protections than any place on earth. That's what my immigrant parents saw. It's what their American-born son still sees. What do you see? I'm Bobby Jindal for Prager University.
Do you remember America? If you read about it in a history textbook, you probably learned about a land of oppression, racism, sexism, income inequality, police brutality, and imperial wars. Aside from that, it was a great place. That is how America is portrayed in most American high schools and colleges, in America's media, films, and by its progressive politicians. In the words of filmmaker Michael Moore, America is a nation founded on genocide, built on the backs of slaves, and maintained through the subjugation of women to second-class citizenship and economic disempowerment. Is that America's history? Is that who Americans were and are? George Orwell understood that the most effective way to destroy a people is to deny and obliterate their own understanding of their history. History is much more than a collection of facts. History, and our understanding of it, tells us who we are as a people in the same way your personal memories and experiences define and shape who you are. Wipe out your memory, and you wipe out your identity. When you raise a generation of Americans to hold their country's past in contempt by exaggerating America's faults and ignoring its triumphs, then they will have no respect for American institutions or the beliefs on which the nation is based. It hasn't always been this way. Until the last few decades, liberals and conservatives alike shared a common understanding of America's origins, its history, and its mission of spreading liberty within America and around the world. They recognized America as the country of the Pilgrims in Jamestown, of the self-evident truths of the Declaration of Independence, of the individual rights won through revolution and secured in the U.S. Constitution. This was the country of the frontier spirit and of almost unlimited possibilities, the country that paid for the sin of slavery with the carnage of its Civil War, of economic dynamism and endless invention, of unparalleled individual opportunity, and the country that defeated fascism and communism in the 20th century. Previous generations took all this for granted and reveled in it. So what changed? Starting in the 1960s, a new so-called progressive narrative took hold that sought not to uplift, inspire, and unite, but to demean, degrade, and divide. It sought to replace the pride of American achievement with shame. Ironically, this all happened while America was making extraordinary strides in civil rights, especially for minorities and women. But anything less than perfection, which can never exist given that every society is composed of flawed human beings, is now considered a total failure, and victims of the past are elevated as an indictment of the present. Along the way, all the classic American touchstones have been undermined. According to the progressive narrative, Christopher Columbus discovered America only to despoil it. The founders wrote the Constitution only to codify their ownership of slaves. The great captains of industry enriched themselves only by exploiting the poor. American traditions that were perfectly acceptable even a few years ago, pledging allegiance to the flag, singing the national anthem, even saying Merry Christmas, have been called into question, mocked, and sometimes banned. The outcome of this new, nonviolent civil war between those who hold America and its history in contempt and those who, without denying its flaws, revere America, will determine the future of the American experiment, the new history we will make. Is America a country that was built by slavery, or a country that overcame and abolished slavery at the cost of 600,000 lives? Is America a country of rampant discrimination, or an accepting people in active pursuit of a more perfect union? Is it a country of grinding exploitation, or a land of limitless opportunity? The time has come to choose. How will you remember America? I'm James Robbins, columnist for USA Today and author of Erasing America for Prager University.
The national anthem stands for freedom, even the freedom to do foolish things, like protesting the national anthem. But like my mama always said, just because you are free to do the wrong thing, it doesn't mean you should. Starting in 2016, some professional football players have refused to stand when the national anthem is played before a game. Some of them kneel, some of them sit on the bench, some of them raise their fist, and some don't even come out of the locker room. This was all started by San Francisco 49er quarterback Colin Kaepernick. His idea was to protest the alleged mistreatment of Black people by police, and by America in general. As he put it, I am not going to stand up to show pride in a flag for a country that oppresses Black people and people of color. Kaepernick no longer plays in the league because apparently NFL owners are racist against backup quarterbacks who don't throw well. But his protest lives on and has spread to college and high school athletes. Even elementary school kids have gotten into the act. I like football, and I sing the anthem publicly at events. This doesn't make me an expert, but I've got a problem with some things here. First, the protest is based on something that just isn't true. And second, even if it were true, the protest is misdirected and self-defeating. Let's start with problem one. Despite what we're told by Black Lives Matter and their media allies, the police are not engaged in a coordinated campaign to destroy the Black race. As Harvard professor Roland Fryer, who happens to be Black, and others have shown, there is no evidence of racial bias in police shootings. In any case, the thing that makes headlines, police shootings of unarmed Black men, is very rare. How rare? Statistics show that an unarmed Black man is more likely to be killed by lightning than a policeman. So if police are trying to persecute Black folks, they're doing a really bad job. Am I saying racism doesn't exist? Of course not. Am I saying racist cops don't exist? Of course not. But I would say this. Blacks have a lot more to fear from Black criminals than from the police. The police keep us safe, and they risk their lives every day doing it. That sounds like it's a lot more deserving of a thank you than a screw you. Now, problem two. The protest is misdirected and self-defeating. The American flag and the national anthem are symbols that represent our country. Even if some police officers are racist jerks, it doesn't make sense to protest those particular jerks by demonstrating against the country as a whole. Martin Luther King Jr. protested discrimination against Blacks on city buses by boycotting city buses. He never denigrated the flag or the anthem. In fact, he did the opposite. He argued that the people who oppress Blacks are the ones denigrating the flag and what it stands for. And what does it stand for? Ironically, it's the protesters themselves who give us the answer. It stands for freedom. The fact that you can disrespect the anthem and the flag proves that you're free. Anyone who doesn't stand for the anthem would do themselves a favor if they studied some current events. They'd learn that oppressive countries don't allow anyone to publicly disrespect national symbols, much less earn millions of dollars while doing it. You won't see anyone sitting for their national anthem in North Korea or Iran. Well, you might, but that will be the last time you see them. Which brings me to my final point. In America, where you are free to sit or stand during the national anthem, sitting when you should be standing is more a statement about you than about America. And you don't come off too well. You come off, frankly, as ignorant and ungrateful. Ignorant about a country that works to correct its faults, and ungrateful for the opportunity and freedom that it offers all its citizens. For that, I'm standing. How about you? I'm Joy Villa for Prager University.
When John Adams and Benjamin Franklin read Thomas Jefferson's draft of the Declaration of Independence, they undoubtedly recognized two things: Jefferson's peerless prose and the political wisdom of the 17th century English thinker John Locke. We still admire Jefferson's skill as a writer, but we have lost an appreciation for Jefferson's philosophical mentor. John Locke was born in 1632 in a small village in Somerset, England. He studied at Oxford to be a physician, but achieved fame as a political theorist. In 1690, he authored one of the most famous political tracts in history, Two Treatises of Government. England had just gone through a period of great political turmoil, the so-called Glorious Revolution of 1688, in which the Catholic king, James II, was overthrown and replaced by a Protestant one, William of Orange. The purpose of that revolution, which Locke supported, was not merely to substitute one king for another, but to move power away from the monarch and place it in the hands of the people and their elected representatives. The laws and liberties of this kingdom, in Locke's view, belonged to its citizens. This was, of course, how the American rebels saw their relationship with England. The Americans had no say in laws that the English crown and parliament were forcing on them. And, to put it mildly, they didn't like it. No taxation without representation was a classic expression of their displeasure. But how to frame the argument so that the whole world would understand it? Jefferson looked to Locke for inspiration and guidance. And using Locke helped in another way. How better, Jefferson calculated, to justify an American revolution than to use the arguments that were once used to justify an English one? So, what were those arguments? Locke posited three. First, all men are created equal. Second, certain basic rights exist independent of government. Third, government exists to protect those rights. Let's take them in turn. Number one, all men are created equal. Locke starts this argument at a very basic level, namely that human beings were created equal by God. We're all part of the same species, we're all capable of doing human things. In that sense, we are equal, not in qualities or outcome, but in rights. As John Locke wrote, creatures of the same species, born to all the same advantages of nature and the use of the same faculties, should also be equal without subordination or subjection. In this way, a king is in no way superior to a commoner, such that he might violate the commoner's rights. The king is a human being. The commoner is a human being. Each can reason. Therefore, one is equal to the other. We take this for granted now, but in 1690, it was a radical notion. Number two, certain basic rights exist independent of government. Locke believed that it was man's natural state to be free. Therefore, freedom pre-exists government. That is, freedom came first, government came later. One hears this thinking expressed in Jefferson's famous phrase, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights." Here's how Locke put it. The natural state of man is to be free from any superior power on earth, and not to be under the will or legislative authority of a government. As rational human beings, Locke contended, we have the liberty, whether king or commoner, to think and act as we wish so long as we harm no one else. Number three, government exists to protect those rights. For Locke, the purpose of government was to protect the individual's freedom and to protect the property, the land and material goods he lawfully acquired. The last thing Locke wanted was to give the government the power to take away that liberty or undermine those property rights. If government couldn't provide those protections, or if it abused its power, it didn't deserve to exist. The end of law, he wrote, is not to abolish or restrain freedom, but to preserve and enlarge freedom. Boiled down into a revolutionary slogan, we might summarize Locke's three-pronged philosophy this way: don't tread on me. Can't get much more American than that. But today, Locke's ideas are under full-fledged assault. There are many Americans who believe that human beings are not created equal, that we should treat people differently based on their group identity. There are many Americans who believe that rights do not pre-exist government, that government is both our master and protector, granting and withdrawing privileges as it sees fit. And there are many Americans who believe that government should have almost unlimited power. Everything that Locke rejected, these Americans rushed to embrace. Their preference for paternalistic government is not what Locke envisioned or what Jefferson described in the Declaration of Independence. We need to reintroduce John Locke and his ideas to a nation that has become increasingly blind to fundamental elements of its own history and character. Because if we lose Locke, we lose America. I'm Ben Shapiro for Prager University.
I want to tell you something that everybody once knew, and now many have either forgotten or never learned. Pay very close attention. America promises you freedom. America does not promise you love. Let's start with the freedom part. It's all right there in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Free speech. Freedom to practice the religion of your choice. The purpose of government is to protect your freedom, period. America was a rough and tumble place in its early days. It still is. Let's hope it always remains so. You don't want to live in a country where all your needs are taken care of by the government. That's not how you become great. That's how you become dependent, vulnerable, and truly oppressed. America is a land of opportunity for anyone of any color. Just follow some basic rules. Get an education, work hard, act responsibly, and you'll have a good shot at a good life. But you might also fail. You might fail a bunch of times and then succeed. Or you might succeed and blow it all. That's America, a never-ending dance of risk and reward, all made possible by freedom. Freedom is America's source of power, and the denial of that power to Black people and others at the inception of this nation and for nearly 200 years after its founding remains a stain and a source of pain. Yes, some of the founders had slaves, but almost all of them knew that it was morally wrong and would one day end. When Thomas Jefferson wrote the words, "All men are created equal," the slavery question was resolved. The only issue was how and when. And it took a lot longer than it should have, but it did end. And a lot of good people died on the battlefield to see that it did. And when it ended, giants like Booker T. Washington and Frederick Douglass understood that Black Americans would have to succeed on their own as free men and women. They had no illusions that the government would save them. They only wanted what all Americans should ever want the government to do: protect their freedom. But the founders never promised love, not to whites or Blacks or anyone else. During his famous "I Have a Dream" speech, Martin Luther King referenced freedom 20 times. He never once spoke the word love. Why not? Because America has nothing to do with that. If you want love, and we all do, look to God, your family, and your friends. The government doesn't love you and isn't supposed to. The government is a poor and abusive provider. It offers the bare minimum and fosters a dependency that undermines freedom. During the 2020 Black Lives Matter season, NBA players actually wore jerseys with the slogan, "Love us," emblazoned on the back. You can't demand love from people. Love is freely given or not given at all. Telling people not to call you this name or that name, or not to act this way or that way, consciously or unconsciously, because it offends you, will not bring you love. Love is your mother's smile or that look your kid gives you when you come home from work. Love is that man or woman who protects you when you're scared and provides a home where you can flourish. And love is what God offers you every moment of every day. To the government, you're just a social security number, nothing more. And I'm okay with that, because I don't want or expect the government to know or care about me. Mostly, I want the government to leave me alone. I'm proud to be an American, and I'm proud to be a Black man in America. Blacks have made enormous contributions to this country. But let me tell you what our single greatest contribution has been. We have been this nation's moral conscience. Blacks have forced America to live up to its best ideals. Our righteous pursuit of freedom, not love, compelled this nation to seek and find its better self. It's been a long, hard road, but we're close to Dr. King's promised land. We have reached the mountaintops in politics, in medicine, in space, in literature, in sports, in music, in business. No other majority white country has ever been led by a black man or woman. Blacks can demand opportunity. That's every American's right. We can demand freedom. That's every American's right. But we can't demand love. That's no one's right. And that brings me back to God. Blacks have suffered mightily and prospered mightily in America. But in our long journey, we've always been headed in the right direction. Until now. Because we have taken a wrong turn. Away from God, where we have, as a community, always found strength and solace, and toward government, which offers us nothing but empty promises. I'm Jason Whitlock for Prager University.
The birthday of a new world is at hand. That was what Thomas Paine, the fiery pamphleteer, wrote in 1776, as 13 of Great Britain's North American colonies rose in revolt against British rule and declared themselves a newly independent nation. The American Revolution was something the world had never seen, politically, economically, and diplomatically. Let's look at all three. First, the politics. Revolutions themselves were not new, of course. Britain put itself through not one, but two revolutions in the 17th century. Other countries in Europe endured similar upheavals. These rebellions shared one of two goals: replace the current monarch with another one, or extort new protections and privileges from the existing regime. In stark contrast, the Americans did not propose merely overthrowing a monarchy. They proposed ending the very idea of monarchy as a worthwhile form of government. In America, the citizen, not the government or the king, would hold the keys to power. With this overturning of the old way of doing things, the rebels made the political systems of Europe look as antiquated and irrational as fully as Newton's laws had made medieval physics look antiquated and irrational. As it was with politics, so it was with economics. Tearing up the old order meant more than just refusing to take political orders from kings, dukes, and princes. It meant taking no economic orders from them either. In a society of free and equal citizens, Americans would follow their own economic initiative. They would be as free economically as they were politically. This small government model meant the state was to interfere as little as possible in the citizen's life. Americans founded the only country ever to be based on the principle of restraining the government. And that unleashed such dynamic economic growth, it took America from a fledgling state to a world power in just 50 years. A child born in 1776 could live to see canal systems link waterways from New York to New Orleans, see the electrical telegraph leap across unheard-of distances in communications, and the steamboat and railroad move passengers and freight at fractions of the cost imposed by horse and wagon. The sheer novelty of the Revolution's first two legs, the political and the economic, was so great that many Americans, such as Yale President Timothy Dwight, expressed a desire not merely to remake the North American continent, but the rest of the world as well. America, Dwight wrote in a popular poem of the time, was destined to hush the tumult of war and give peace to the world. But the founders rejected this view. The United States was to be a republic, not an empire, a beacon, not a kingdom. Far from any desire to share America's redemptive culture, the founders' tendency was to regard the rest of the world as a potential threat, eager to strangle the American experiment, either by the reimposition of empire or by association with more unstable attempts at revolution, as in France. The American position regarding foreign interventions was articulated by then-Secretary of State John Quincy Adams in 1821. Wherever the standard of freedom and independence has been unfurled, there will America's heart, her benedictions, and her prayers be. But she goes not abroad in search of monsters to destroy. Of course, the United States has not always lived by this attitude. America has allowed itself to be pulled into foreign adventures of which the founders would have disapproved. Nor has the United States always lived up to its best ideals. It has, at various times, seen unfettered commerce turn into monopoly and corruption. And we've had to deal with the terrible shame of slavery and its long aftermath. Human beings are imperfect, and therefore any form of government they create will be too. But the wonder of America, from its founding to this day, is not that it has stumbled. The wonder is that Americans have stumbled as infrequently as they have, and managed to make and keep America the strongest and freest country in the world. That birthday Thomas Paine proclaimed is still very much worth celebrating. If it isn't celebrated, it will be lost. And that would be a tragedy for America and for the world. I'm Alan Gelzo for Prager University.
Let me tell you how my story ends. I become a tenured, award-winning professor of political science at an Ivy League university and then at one of the leading universities in the South. Now let me tell you how my story begins. I grew up in rural Virginia, literally dirt poor. I dropped out of school in the 8th grade and had 3 children by the time I'm 20. I consider myself to be a reasonably modest person, but even I have to admit that's quite a journey. How did I do it? I worked hard, not crazy 24/7 hard, just hard. I made good decisions, not brilliant 3-dimensional chess decisions, just good ones. I met people along the way who helped me and sincerely wanted to see me succeed. Not because they had something to gain, but because they were decent people. Almost all of these individuals, by the way, were white. But mostly, I think I was blessed in one crucial way. I was born in America, a true land of opportunity for anyone of any color or background. In this country, where you start your life does not determine where you end up. That works in both directions, by the way. You can start out with every advantage and waste them all. Or you can start out with nothing and become a success. It all depends on you. Your attitude is far more important than your race, gender, or social class in determining what you will accomplish in life. When I hear young blacks, or anyone for that matter, talk about systemic racism, I don't know whether to laugh or cry. I want to laugh because it's such nonsense. I want to cry because I know it's pushing untold numbers of young blacks into a dead end of self-pity and despair. Instead of seizing the amazing opportunities America offers them, they seize an excuse to explain why they're not succeeding. I was born into a world where systemic racism was real. No fooling, outright bigotry, back of the bus real. But here's what you need to know. Yes, that racism shaped the black experience, but even then, it did not define it. Change was in the air. Call it systemic reform. The modern civil rights movement was in its infancy, and the leaders who fought for equal rights for blacks were men and women of all races. They believed in America and were determined to see it live up to its highest ideals, ideals manifest in the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution. Did I know growing up that George Washington and Thomas Jefferson owned slaves? I don't think I ever thought about it. If I did, I'd like to think that I would have had enough common sense to know that we can't judge men who lived 250 years ago by the moral standards of our own day. But I know that Jefferson wrote the words in the Declaration of Independence that made slavery ultimately impossible, that all men are created equal. And I know that Washington, Hamilton, Franklin, and Adams, and the rest of the founders risked everything to make my world, my America, possible. How could I not be grateful for that and for the sacrifices so many others have made to preserve it? The truth is, I cannot remember a time when I did not love America and feel pride in the belief that I live in the greatest country in the world. I knew if I diligently pursued my ambitions, I could leave the poverty of my early years with all its abuse and depression behind me. I was fortunate in another way. I was spared the life-sapping, negative messages about America that are crippling a generation of young people. These ideas are poison: white privilege, whiteness as a form of property, unconscious racism, reparations, microaggressions, police have it out for blacks, that the United States was created to protect and promote slavery. These are the ideas young people are told they must accept, and then they're told to reject the ideas that can save them, the antidote, the success principles that enabled me and millions of other Americans to escape lives of poverty. These principles aren't complicated. Work hard, learn from your mistakes, take personal responsibility for your actions. When I made the decisions to get my high school equivalency, attend a community college, and then earn 4 additional college and university degrees, I believed that my education would open doors. And it did. It was only when exposed to academic theories of oppression in graduate school that I was informed that because I was Black, poor, and female, I could never do what I had already accomplished. Thank God it was too late for these toxic messages to stop me. Don't let them stop you. I'm Carol Swain, host of Be the People podcast and retired professor of political science and law at Vanderbilt University for Prager University.
The left and the right view America and its history very differently. Conservatives view America as President Abraham Lincoln viewed it, as the last best hope of Earth. While acknowledging America's flaws, conservatives regard America as the best society ever created, giving more people of more backgrounds, more freedom, more opportunity, and more affluence than any other society, and doing more good for more people in other countries than any society in history. The left, on the other hand, sees America as having been and continuing to be a very flawed country, morally no better than many and morally inferior to many. The left's view is that America was founded by rich white males who were intent on protecting their race, their wealth, and in many cases, their slaves. America was and remains sexist, intolerant, xenophobic, and bigoted, a country of unacceptable material inequality where the super rich and big corporations have far too much power and influence. The further left one goes, the more negative the assessment of America. Here's a telling example. On my radio show, I once dialogued with Howard Zinn, arguably the most influential American historian of the second half of the 20th century. Here is one part of our dialogue. Professor Zinn said, if people knew history, they would scoff at the idea that the United States is a force for the betterment of humanity. When I said that America has done more good for humanity than any other country, Professor Zinn responded, America has, quote, probably done more bad than good, unquote. For the left, the moral flaws in American history are enormous, but all the unique good America has done, both in America and abroad, is minimized or ignored. Take the example of slavery. This terrible institution is the most widely cited proof of American evil. The problem with that judgment, however, is that every civilization in world history, even including African societies, practiced slavery, often on a far larger scale than America did. But there are 2 other questions about slavery that must be asked in order to make a moral judgment about America. The first is, which societies were the first to abolish slavery? Since all societies had slavery, that is a far more important question to ask than who had slaves. It turns out that all the societies that first abolished slavery were rooted in the Jewish and Christian Bibles, and among them was the United States. The second question that needs to be answered is this: was America morally better than other societies in just about every other regard? And the answer is overwhelmingly yes. America gradually became the least racist, least xenophobic country in the world. In no country do people of every race and ethnicity become accepted as full members of the society as do immigrants to America. And no country in history has fought for the liberty of others as much as America has. That is why, for example, 37,000 Americans died in Korea, a country that offered America no economic gain. The purpose was to protect Koreans from communist tyranny. Today, South Korea, where American troops are still stationed, is one of the wealthiest and freest countries in Asia. Meanwhile, North Korea, the part of the Korean peninsula that America did not succeed in liberating, is the least free and poorest country on earth. Without America, people around the world would suffer from far more tyranny, enslavement, and genocide. The countries where American troops have remained long after their combat ceased, Germany, Japan, and South Korea, have prospered economically and morally. Countries that America abandoned, such as Vietnam and Iraq, experienced mass murder and other horrors. The left, however, views nearly all of America's wars since 1945 as expressions of superpower imperialism. Days before the 2008 American presidential election, the Democratic candidate, then Senator Barack Obama, announced, quote, "We are 5 days away from fundamentally transforming the United States of America." Exactly so. The left wants to fundamentally transform America. The right doesn't. Conservatives want to conserve America's unique greatness and improve it where necessary, but not transform it. If America is fundamentally transformed, it will not become better than other nations. It will become like other nations. I'm Dennis Prager.